What is one memory that never fails to make you smile every time you think about it? Probably qualifying for state in wrestling. No one expected me to win that match. Glad it ended for you that way. My coach always said that even though it's just high school, you'll remember it forever. He wasn't wrong. The last time I saw my great-grandma Claudine. She was 98 and had horrible dementia. She didn't recognize my grandmother, her daughter, and it was honestly very sad. We were going to her house because my papa, her husband, died and we needed to go to his funeral. Before we left, we got a car wash and one of the guys there gave us a red carnation. It was a weird promotion or something, I think. But after a 10-plus hour drive, we made it to her house. I rushed inside and overheard my grandma begging my great-grandma to remember her. Because my grandma had recently been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. She kicked its ass and beat it. I gave her a second and knocked. Then walked in. The very first thing my great-grandma said when she saw me was, "Is that my beautiful? My name?" I nearly cried just from that. My grandma was super happy she remembered me but sad she didn't remember her. And decided I should spend time with her alone. She went off to go get some food, I think. But I don't really know. So it was just me and my grandma. We chatted for a while and the inevitable question finally came up. Quote, "Me, who was that woman in here earlier? That's your daughter." Grandma. "Oh really? Why does her hair look so weird?" "Oh, it's a wig. She is bald now." I couldn't bring myself to tell her her daughter had cancer. Even thought she wouldn't remember. She giggled a bit, then attempted to pull me in. And said, "I'm gonna steal her wig." I laughed. She couldn't walk or lift her own arms on her own. Let alone sha wig right off of my grandmother's head. After about an hour my tummy started to grumble, so I called my grandma back in and went to the kitchen for some potatoes. After maybe 5 minutes I heard my grandma scream. I was afraid my great-grandma finally had died and rushed in. But it wasn't that at all. My great-grandma did it. She ripped the wig right off of my grandma's head. She told her to come close to whisper a secret and with all her might snatched it. She went on to live in a care home and got into many more antics. And would call once a week begging me to steal her away and start a traveling band. I was thinking of posting something similar. But this is awesome. My grandmother had very bad dementia as well. She passed a few years ago at 93. Her husband, my dad's father, was a World War II vet and survived some seriously horrific things. As they were in the USSR. I was born there as well. He passed when I was about 5 years old. On his lap. Due to a stroke. Decades later. I was out of town. In college. And my parents couldn't care for her anymore due to constant supervision and medical needs. My father moved HL and Earth to get her to the top of the list of one of the best care facilities in Los Angeles. Towards the end. She couldn't remember who he was very well. Let alone his wife, who was there just about every single day, taking care of her mother-in-law, while my dad went to work to pay for the privilege of us being alive and healthy. We are immigrants from Eastern Europe, USSR at the time. And you can't just give up on family. I went to visit her with my dad for the first time in almost a year. And I was nervous. I felt horrible for not seeing her more often as she practically raised me through grade school. I was afraid she wouldn't remember me. As soon as I walked in, I saw her face light up and she said my name and hugged me and kissed me on the cheek. She introduced me to everyone there. Staff and patients. My dad took a picture of me and her outside. In the garden that afternoon. I don't consider myself to be photogenic. So I wasn't a fan. A year or so later she passed at that facility. A few days after the service. My mom asked me if I wanted to have something that belongs to my grandmother. It was a framed photo. That same photo of that day in the garden. With her face lit up and smiling ear to ear. And me with my standard half-smile smirk. My arm around her and her gripping my hand. The frame had a title, Nana and Me. And the nurse told us that was on her bedside table since that day, next to a picture of her husband and my sister. I keep that picture in its frame on my nightstand next to my stuff for when I get ready in the mornings. I've done a lot of bad things in my life. But every day I see that picture I can't help but remember how good it felt that she remembered me and thought the world of me. Despite life's best efforts to erode all her memories. What a great memory. I screamed when she snatched your grandma's wig. All 4 of my grandparents passed before I could introduce my husband to them. And that always makes me feel sad. We use my granny's candlestick for Shabbos every Friday, and I like to think she'd be delighted to hear that. Okay, this will sound really stupid. But I remember my little brother wanted to see my school ID. I told him that I look really gross in it. He looked at it anyways. He told me that I don't look gross. I don't know why. But that felt like the most sincere compliment. Whenever someone says I look good, I just feel like they're trying to be nice. But when he said that, I felt really nice. Normally, if you tell someone you're not ugly, it sounds really rude. But for me, it just feels more realistic. Riding my bike with my childhood friends around the neighborhood in the summer. Carefree living and my favorite of all memories. When my daughter was little, she literally could not stop talking. She has ADHD, and that's just one of the effects. One day, we were walking by an abandoned lot. Looked like an old gas station or something. My daughter looked at it and said, "Wow, that's a beautiful yard." Quote. I said, "That's a lot." She said, "Yeah, a lot of beautiful yard." Quote. Reminds me of my younger brother years ago. A tad displeased with the hardness of his bicycle seat. My mother then tells him it'll be just fine, it needs padding. My brother then proceeds to pat the bicycle seat with his hand, thinking it required padding. When my older kids were 3 and 1, we took them to Florida to visit family and took a day trip out to a barrier island. We'd been telling the kids that we'd be riding a ferry out to the island, but didn't realize that the 3-year-old had been hearing ferry until she started crying when we got on a boat instead. English having so many words that sound the same for different things is never-ending laughs with little kids. My son's best one was when he was about 3 and had kicked off his shoes for the millionth time in the car after my asking him not to. This night it was raining and I said, "Fine. You'll just have to walk through the rain in your bare feet then." After a pause he says, "But mummy, I don't gots bare feet. I gots kid feet." Quote. It was so cute. My husband and I have a habit of touching feet when we sleep, a nice cute comfort thing because cuddling in your sleep is just impractical and sweaty. Once we were napping in the study on the inflatable mattress. We were head to toe because I was trying to use my phone while charging it. We fell asleep, and I woke up and instinctively reached my toes to his toes. I heard a muffled, "Hey," because I forgot we were head to toe and shoved my feet around his head instead. It's been 10 years and I still laugh thinking about it. When my so and I were still just casual acquaintances, I ran into him pushing his then 4-month-old nephew in a stroller. Seeing him dote on a smiling, giggling baby made my heart melt. I've told this story on here before, but I used to work for a landscaping company cutting grass in industrial parks. One day I was cutting a huge piece of lawn after a light rain, and stirred up a bunch of bugs. Some swallows must have noticed and went on a sort of feeding frenzy all around me for like 1/2 hour. I would be riding along and a bird would swoop what felt like inches from my head, and then spiral all around to catch more bugs. After watching them for a minute or so, I knew they wouldn't crash into me. So it was like being given a private air show. They called you the Swallow Man. Hey, I've seen that on ... NVM. But yeah, I've seen that. Ah. I see you're a man of culture as WWLL. I was 9. It was my first time visiting Disney and holidaying in the States. Living in the tropics, I couldn't get used to the cold summer nights of California. You read that right. And came down with a mild fever. Was rather down after realizing I wasn't going to be able to catch the fireworks display. So my dad snuck me out when my mom was busy looking after my brother. He carried me to the castle where I saw fireworks for the first time in my life. He even indulged me further and let me go on some rides before that. Thanks, Dad. My son, when he was like 3 on a hike, beautiful woods, he made his way up a decent-sized hill and at the top muttered, "Happy." First time in Vegas. You can't tell us the story though. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. True that. What happens in the strip club? Vegas stays in the strip club. Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Your bloodstream for up to 36 hours. Facebook. Your credit rating. Your criminal record. One time my brother said something funny while I was eating cereal and I had a huge mouthful of unchewed mini wheats and milk and I started to laugh, but then my sister said something funnier and then I thought of the most epic funny thing to say, but I was trapped in the state of laughter, trying not to spit out or choke on my food. Which actually made me laugh even harder because of the situation I was in. Then my brother looks at me like, "WTF is wrong with you?" and I just point at him and then my sister and then myself, and it was so stupid and I just fell to the floor crying with laughter. I can almost see you crying and rolling around still crunching. Made me chuckle, thanks. I have been you in scenarios like this so many times and I love it. When Mum told me that to get back at Dad's mum, who's an AE, she took some dog St. froze it, and then delivered it to her house as an Xmas present. She said by the time it defrosted and is under the Xmas tree she won't know where the stench of St is coming from. It would have to be the first time that I told my current girlfriend that I loved her. It happened not long before we started dating and it was me, my girlfriend and her best friend drinking, and after a few hours of drinking, joking around and just having a good time, I ended up with my head in my girlfriend's lap while she was running her fingers through with my hair, and while she was doing that I looked up at her and said, "I'm in love with you." Fast forward 10 months and I still get butterflies in my stomach whenever I see her, and I've made sure to tell her at least once a day that I love her so much and that she's absolutely stunning. My daughter was born in July. The following fall she often would cry at night. I would wrap her in a blanket and take her for a walk. Moments after we got into the cool fall air, she would fall asleep, but I would make the walk last as long as I could. Now every fall when the first cool evening hits I smile and often take a walk. Edit. She's now 38. Watching my aunt make tamales with her sisters and mom on Christmas Eve. She was so happy and it was when she was at her best. Laughing and smiling. Fun times. I miss her a lot. That's really lovely, red heart. I went to Breen with my crush. There was a fair there. With roller coasters, food and cool rides, bumper cars and horror rides. I was so close to her. Her presence made it 100x better. The happiest day of my life. No stress. No confusion. No toxicity. It is the only memory I have that brings pure joy. I still feel the warmth of the sun and the taste of the food. We were kids being kids. And that was all right. My first time coming home from college. I was worried my dog would forget me while I was gone. But when I walked through the door, she lost her St. I've never felt so loved and relieved. Dogs never forget. They're the best. I think of my dog that we had for 14 years. But the last 3 years of her life she lived a while away with my aunt as we moved and couldn't have pets. I visited as often as I could, but with work and school, it was difficult. I remember I was at a job interview and walked out of it feeling like I killed it, then looked at my phone and had near 50 missed calls from family. I called back and was told they were putting my dog down that day. I ran straight to the train station and got on so many trains to get to her. I hadn't seen her in about a year at this point, which breaks my heart. Even though it had been a year and she was so old and unwell. The second I walked through that door, she came to me. I could see it exhausted her to walk over, and she lay at my feet. She gave herself a push against my legs so she was on her back and could get belly rubs. My aunt said she had been behind the sofa all day refusing to get out, but as soon as I walked through the door, apparently she lit up, and it was the first time her tail wagged in a couple of days. I stayed with her as long as I could, then she had to go. But I'll always treasure that last memory of her and how even in her last moments, she still had so much love for me. I know this is an unpopular opinion here, but this is one of the reasons I will never get a dog. I could never recover from something like that, and I prefer to avoid it at all. Sorry, I am not that strong.